Gilson was a young man, though his appearance suggested otherwise. His face, framed by a thick, unkempt beard and tangled hair, reflected the harsh years he'd lived on the streets. His clothes, dirty and worn, barely offered protection against the cold and the elements. For a long time, Gilson hadn't had a home. He wandered the city streets, seeking refuge in the most unexpected corners. Each morning, Gilson woke early, shaking off the dust and grime of the previous night. His daily routine began with the search for a suitable spot to play his guitar. This instrument was his most prized possession, a vestige of better times. He'd find a corner in a bustling square or beneath the shade of a tree in the park and begin to play. Gilson's music wasn't cheerful or vibrant. His melodies were melancholic, laden with a deep sadness that seemed to emanate from the depths of his being. The notes he coaxed from his guitar told stories of pain and loneliness, of lost hopes and forgotten loves. Passers-by, drawn in by the sorrowful beauty of his music, would often pause to listen. Some would leave him a few coins, others would simply stand for a moment, moved by the melancholy notes. Life on the streets had taught Gilson to appreciate small gestures of kindness. An elderly woman would often leave him an apple, a young man would offer him a hot coffee, and the occasional curious child would draw near to listen more closely. Though most people passed him by, indifferent to his presence, these small acts of generosity reminded him that humanity still existed in the world. The local police also knew Gilson. The officers on their rounds had grown accustomed to seeing him in his usual corner, playing his guitar with closed eyes, lost in his thoughts. They considered him harmless, and at times even stopped to listen. "Morning, Gilson," one of the officers would greet him while leaving a 5-reel note. Gilson would look up and nod, grateful, without stopping his music. Despite the harsh conditions of his life, Gilson found solace in his guitar. It was his way of communicating with the world, of expressing what he couldn't put into words. There were moments when his music seemed to resonate with the emotions of his listeners, creating a silent but powerful connection. One afternoon, while playing a particularly mournful ballad, a young woman stopped beside him. "What's your name?" she asked with a kind smile. Gilson looked up, startled by the direct question. "Gilson," he replied, his voice raspy from lack of use. "You play beautifully, Gilson. I'm Marlene. Would you like some food?" the young woman said, pulling out a sandwich from her bag. Gilson nodded, accepting the offering gratefully. Marlene sat beside him, listening in silence as he continued to play. There was something about her presence that he found comforting. It wasn't just the food, but the company, the simple act of being seen and heard. Marlene returned several times over the following weeks, each time with a smile and some provisions. Little by little, Gilson began to open up, sharing small fragments of his life with her. "I used to be a doctor," he confessed one day while tuning his guitar. Marlene looked at him with surprise, but no judgment. "What happened?" she asked softly. Gilson sighed, his fingers pausing on the strings. "It's a long story," he finally said, his voice tinged with sadness. The days passed, and while life on the streets was still hard, Marlene's presence and the music from his guitar gave Gilson a reason to keep going. Despite his disheveled appearance and his wandering life, deep inside him, a spark of hope refused to be extinguished. The city continued on its course, indifferent, but in the quiet corners where Gilson played, the notes of his guitar told stories of resilience and humanity, resonating in the hearts of those willing to listen. Marlene was a young woman with a generous heart. From the first time she heard Gilson play his guitar on the park bench, she felt an inexplicable connection to his mournful melodies. Each note seemed to tell a story of pain and loss, and Marlene, with her compassionate nature, couldn't help but be drawn to the mysterious street musician. "Hi, Gilson. I brought you some food," Marlene said, holding out a sandwich wrapped in paper. Gilson looked up, his eyes filled with gratitude, but also with a deep sadness. "Thank you, Marlene," he replied softly, accepting the sandwich. Marlene sat down next to him on the bench, listening in silence as Gilson resumed playing his guitar and began a new melody. It was a melancholic piece, charged with emotions that resonated in the cool morning air. Marlene closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. "How can you spend so much time with that guy?" A voice shattered the spell. Marlene opened her eyes and saw Valdomiro, her boyfriend, standing in front of them with a look of disgust. Valdomiro was a wealthy young man, accustomed to getting what he wanted, effortlessly. His arrogance stood in stark contrast to Gilson's humility. "Valdomiro, don't start," Marlene said, rising from the bench. "Gilson hasn't done anything wrong." Valdomiro scoffed. "Wrong? He's just a bum, Marlene. I don't understand why you waste your time with him." Gilson looked at Valdomiro, and for a fleeting moment his eyes widened as if recognizing something in him. It was a fleeting moment, but Marlene noticed it. She quickly dismissed it, thinking it might have been her imagination. "Valdomiro, please, have a little respect," Marlene insisted. "He's a human being, just like you and me." Valdomiro shook his head. "I don't see why I should respect someone who doesn't respect himself. Look at how he lives." Gilson, who had been silent, stopped playing and looked directly at Valdomiro. "You don't know anything about me," he said in a firm yet calm voice. "You have no right to judge me." The tension between the three was palpable. Marlene felt she should defend Gilson, but she also knew that arguing with Valdomiro at that moment would not do any good. "Let's go, Valdomiro," she finally said. "We'll talk about this another time." Valdomiro snorted but nodded. "As you wish, Marlene. But I'm telling you, you're wasting your time." As they walked away, Marlene cast a last glance at Gilson, who had resumed playing his guitar, though his hands trembled slightly. She knew there was more to him, something she hadn't uncovered yet, and she was determined to get to the bottom of it. Later that afternoon, Marlene and Valdomiro were at a nearby cafe. The atmosphere between them was still tense. "I don't understand why you care so much about that guy," Valdomiro said, breaking the silence. "Because he's a person, Valdomiro. You can't treat people like that just because they have less than you," Marlene replied, trying to remain calm. "It just doesn't make sense," he insisted. "Look, Marlene, you and I come from different worlds. You don't understand what it's like to struggle every day just to survive. Gilson is someone who's been through things neither you nor I can imagine." Valdomiro frowned. "Not my problem. If he's on the street, it's because he's done something wrong in his life." Marlene sighed. "It's not always like that, Valdomiro. Sometimes bad things happen to good people. We don't know his story." Valdomiro was silent for a moment, then shrugged. "Still, I don't see why you should care so much." Marlene decided not to argue further. She knew Valdomiro was stubborn and hard to convince, but in her heart, she felt there was something special about Gilson, something that deserved her time and attention. That night, while Valdomiro slept, Marlene lay awake thinking about Gilson. She remembered the look in his eyes when he saw Valdomiro. It had been a recognition, a glimmer of something deeper. Could it be that they knew each other from before? The idea bothered her, but also intrigued her. The following day, Marlene returned to the park. Gilson was in his usual spot, playing his guitar. She approached him with a smile. "Hello, Gilson. How are you today?" Gilson looked up and smiled faintly. "Hello, Marlene. I'm doing well, thanks." She sat down next to him, determined to learn more about the man behind the music. "Gilson, would you like to talk a little about yourself? I'd love to hear your story." Gilson looked at her, his eyes reflecting a mixture of emotions. "Maybe someday, Marlene. For now, let the music speak." Marlene nodded, respecting his decision. It was a hot afternoon in the central plaza. Children ran back and forth while adults sought shade under the trees. Gilson, as always, was in his corner, playing his guitar. The melancholic melody that flowed from the strings echoed in the air, attracting a few curious passers-by. Valdomiro, with his group of friends, passed by. His gaze fell on Gilson, and a malicious smile spread across his face. "Look who's here, our beloved street musician," he said sarcastically. Valdomiro's friends laughed, enjoying the show their leader seemed to be setting up. "Let's give him something special today," Valdomiro suggested, taking a sandwich from his bag. "Wanna bet he'll eat it without hesitation?" His friends, eager to see what would happen, nodded in agreement. Valdomiro approached Gilson with a smile that was meant to be friendly. "Hey, buddy, I brought you a sandwich. Looks like you could use some food." Gilson looked up, surprised by the unexpected gesture. "Thank you," he said, accepting the sandwich without suspicion. Marlene, who had been watching the scene from afar, felt a pang of unease. Something about Valdomiro's demeanor didn't sit right with her. She decided to get closer, just as Gilson was about to bite into the sandwich. "Wait, Gilson!" she exclaimed, but it was too late. Gilson had already taken the first bite. Marlene turned to Valdomiro, her eyes blazing with fury. "What did you give him?" Valdomiro shrugged, feigning innocence. "Just a sandwich. What's wrong? Can't I be generous?" Hours later, Gilson began to feel ill. His symptoms worsened rapidly, and Marlene, worried, called an ambulance. At the hospital, the doctors confirmed that Gilson had ingested spoiled food, causing severe food poisoning. Marlene couldn't contain her anger. She knew Valdomiro was behind this. As she waited at the hospital, her mind raced with thoughts of how to confront him. When Gilson was finally stabilized, she decided she couldn't let this go. The following day, Marlene went to Valdomiro's house. Her face was set in determination. "Why did you do it?" she demanded, not bothering with greetings. Valdomiro, taken aback by her arrival, tried to play dumb. "What are you talking about, Marlene?" "You know perfectly well what I'm talking about. You gave Gilson a spoiled sandwich, and you almost killed him." Valdomiro laughed without a trace of remorse on his face. "Come on, Marlene. He's just a beggar. You're overreacting." Marlene couldn't believe her ears. "I can't be with someone so cruel. It's not about him being a beggar. It's about humanity. What happened to you?" "What happened to me? Nothing. What happened to you is that you care too much about someone who doesn't deserve it," Valdomiro retorted coldly. The breakup was inevitable. Marlene left, feeling lighter but with a clear mission in mind. She decided that she would take care of Gilson until he was fully recovered. Every day, after work, she would go to the hospital to visit him. She brought him food, talked to him, and made sure he had everything he needed. Over time, a sincere friendship blossomed between them. Gilson, though still weak, deeply appreciated Marlene's kindness. Their conversations went from being short and practical to long and meaningful. Marlene learned more about Gilson's past and the reasons for his sadness. In turn, Gilson found in Marlene a listening ear and an open heart. The hospital room where Gilson was recovering was small but cozy. Marlene sat in a chair next to his bed, bringing him food and company daily. With each visit, Gilson began to open up a little more, and one afternoon, he finally decided to share his story. "Marlene," Gilson began, staring at the ceiling, "there was a time when I wasn't like this. I had a different life, a life I never thought I'd lose." Marlene looked at him, attentive and without interrupting. She had learned that Gilson's words were precious and that each one carried a heavy weight. "I was a doctor, a highly respected surgeon," he continued, his voice trembling slightly. "I had a wonderful wife, Anna, and a young son, Matteo. They were my world." Gilson's eyes welled up with tears, but he kept them in check. Marlene could see the pain in his expression and knew that this was very difficult for him. She decided not to pressure him and simply be there for him. One day, Anna and Matteo were coming to see me at the hospital. I was on call that night, and I distinctly remember the phone call I received. They had been in an accident. Gilson paused, his breathing becoming ragged. Marlene placed a comforting hand on his, giving him the space he needed to continue. I ran to the emergency room when they arrived. I saw their faces covered in wounds, and although I tried everything I knew, I couldn't save them, my own wife and son, and I couldn't do anything. Gilson's voice broke as he uttered these words. Marlene felt a surge of empathy and sadness for him. "I'm so sorry, Gilson. I can't imagine how difficult that must have been." Gilson nodded, wiping his tears with the back of his hand. "After that, everything changed. I couldn't keep working. I couldn't keep living in the same house. Every corner reminded me of them. So I left. I became what you see now." Marlene felt a deep sorrow for the tragedy Gilson had faced. "What happened to your belongings, your memories of them?" she asked softly. Gilson looked towards the window, his gaze lost in the past. "I kept some things, the most important ones. Photos, a gold chain Anna gave me, and some of Matteo's toys. I kept them with me in a small shelter I found on the outskirts of the city." Marlene noticed the change in his tone, the sadness mixed with something darker. "What happened to those objects?" she asked, knowing the answer wouldn't be easy to hear. "One day, while I was out, someone set fire to my shelter. I lost everything I had left of them in that fire. I couldn't save anything," Gilson said, his voice filled with bitterness. Marlene felt a pang of rage. "Do you know who did it?" Gilson nodded slowly. "It was Valdomiro." The revelation hit Marlene like a punch. She was speechless, trying to process the magnitude of what Gilson had just said. It all made sense now. Valdomiro's attitude, his disdain, and his cruelty. "Are you sure, Gilson?" she finally asked, her voice filled with determination. "Yes, I saw him that night. And when he tried to approach me in the plaza, he made it clear, enjoying my despair," Gilson replied, the restrained rage trembling in his voice. Marlene felt a mixture of anger and disgust. Valdomiro had not only mistreated Gilson, but he had destroyed the last vestiges of his family. "He needs to pay for what he's done," she said firmly. Gilson looked at her, surprised by her determination. "I don't want you getting into trouble, Marlene. You've already done so much for me." "This is not just about you, Gilson. This is about justice. Valdomiro cannot get away with what he's done. He needs to face the consequences of his actions." The friendship between them had grown stronger with each passing day, and now Marlene felt she had a mission, not just to support Gilson, but to fight for the dignity and respect he deserved. Gilson, seeing the determination in Marlene's eyes, felt a spark of hope. Perhaps, after all, he wasn't so alone in this world. The days passed with a tense calm. Gilson continued to recover, but the emotional wound remained open. Marlene knew she had to do something to ensure justice for her friend. One day, while talking to Eduardo, a trusted friend, she laid out her plan. "Eduardo, Marlene said with determination. We have to make Valdomiro pay for what he did. He not only ruined Gilson's life, but he also destroyed the last memories of his family. Eduardo nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. I'm with you, Marlene. What's your plan? We need Valdomiro to confess. The only way to do that is to record him admitting his guilt. But it has to be subtle. He can't suspect anything. Eduardo frowned, thinking through the details. How do you plan to achieve that? Marlene smiled, a spark of determination in her eyes. I'll let him think I'm getting back together with him. I'll meet him at his favorite spot and get him talking. You'll be nearby with the recording equipment. The following evening, Marlene called Valdomiro. Hi, Valdomiro. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I think we need to talk. Can we meet tonight? Valdomiro, surprised by the call, quickly agreed. Sure, Marlene. Let's meet at our usual cafe. The plan was in motion. Eduardo and Marlene prepared a small recording device, making sure it worked perfectly. Are you sure about this, Marlene? Eduardo asked, worried. Yes, she replied firmly. It's the only way to get justice for Gilson. They arrived at the cafe shortly before the agreed time. Marlene sat at a table by the window, while Eduardo positioned himself at a nearby table, out of Valdomiro's sight. When Valdomiro entered, Marlene smiled and got up to greet him. Thanks for coming, Valdomiro, Marlene said, trying to sound sincere. I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I think we need to really talk. Valdomiro visibly relaxed and took a seat across from her. Sure, Marlene. I'm here to listen. Marlene started talking casually, trying to steer the conversation towards the delicate subject. I've been remembering a lot about what happened with Gilson. I felt really bad for him. Do you ever feel guilty about anything? Valdomiro chuckled softly. No, Marlene. I don't feel guilty. Life is tough, and everyone has to deal with their own problems. I understand, Marlene said, leaning slightly toward him. But have you ever felt bad about something you've done? Something that maybe went too far? Valdomiro looked at her curiously, but without suspecting anything. What are you referring to, Marlene? I'm referring to what happened with Gilson's shelter, she said, lowering her voice as if it were a shared secret. You know it was burned down, right? Valdomiro smirked, pleased with the direction of the conversation. Yeah, I know. It was a prank, but I didn't think it was that serious. And his family's memories? Did you know he lost them in the fire? Marlene asked, maintaining her composure. Of course, I knew, Valdomiro replied, enjoying his moment of power. It was part of the plan. I wanted him to feel what it's like to lose everything. Why do you care so much now? Marlene feigned a strained smile. I just wanted to understand better. Sometimes I wonder if it was really the right thing to do. At that moment, Eduardo activated the recording device from his table. The sound of Valdomiro's confession was clearly recorded. Marlene nodded discreetly at Eduardo, indicating that they had what they needed. Well, Valdomiro, Marlene said, getting up slowly. I think I've heard enough. Thank you for being so honest with me. Valdomiro looked at her in confusion. What do you mean, Marlene? I mean, this is over, she said, her voice firm and resolute. You're finished. Before Valdomiro could react, Eduardo stood up and walked towards them. It's all on tape, Valdomiro. We're taking this to the police. Valdomiro's face transformed from arrogance to desperation in a matter of seconds. What? You can't do this to me. Marlene looked him straight in the eye. Yes, I can. And I will. This is for Gilson and everything you've done to him. They left the cafe quickly and headed to the police station. They handed over the recording, explaining the situation. The officers, upon hearing the confession, did not hesitate to take immediate action. The morning Valdomiro was arrested, the sun shone brightly over the city, as if the sky itself was celebrating the triumph of justice. Marlene and Eduardo were at the police station, watching as the officers reviewed the recording that had captured Valdomiro's confession. The police captain, a middle-aged man with a stern expression, listened attentively to the tape before looking up at Marlene and Eduardo. "This is enough to proceed with the arrest," he said, his voice firm and resolute. "Thank you for bringing this evidence to our attention." Marlene nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety. "We just want justice to be served, Captain." Soon after, a group of officers headed to Valdomiro's luxurious home. News of the arrest spread quickly throughout the neighborhood, causing a stir among the residents. Valdomiro, used to controlling every aspect of his life, was caught off guard. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, as the officers read him his rights. "You are being arrested on charges of arson and destruction of private property," explained one of the policemen. Valdomiro tried to protest, but the evidence was irrefutable. He was led away in handcuffs, an expression of disbelief and fury etched on his face. Meanwhile, Marlene and Eduardo went to the hospital to share the good news with Gilson. Upon entering the room, Marlene noticed the improvement in Gilson's health. There was a sparkle in his eyes that she had not seen before. "Gilson," Marlene said, approaching his bed, "we have something to tell you." Gilson sat up, curious. "What happened?" "Valdomiro has been arrested," explained Eduardo. "We recorded him confessing his crimes and the police have taken him into custody." Gilson's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice trembling. "This means so much to me." Marlene gently took his hand. "You don't need to thank us, Gilson. We just want you to have the peace you deserve." The days that followed Valdomiro's arrest were a time of transition and reflection for the community. The news of his actions spread rapidly, and the residents' perception of Gilson began to change. The same people who had once looked at him with disdain or indifference now felt a deep compassion for him. A group of neighbors decided to organize a fundraiser to help Gilson recover some of the belongings he had lost in the fire. "It's the least we can do," said Doña Clara, an elderly woman who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. "Gilson has suffered enough, and we need to show him that he's not alone." The fundraiser was an unexpected success. Marlene and Eduardo helped coordinate the delivery of the donations to Gilson. Among the items were new clothes, a guitar, and several objects that reminded him of his family. "This is incredible," Gilson murmured, touched. "I didn't expect such generosity." "You deserve it," Marlene replied. "It's a small step towards rebuilding your life." Over time, Gilson's health improved significantly, and with the help of Marlene and Eduardo, he found a new place to live. It was a small but cozy house on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by nature, a perfect place to start over. One afternoon, as Marlene and Gilson were walking through the neighborhood, they noticed how the neighbors smiled and greeted them. Gilson, who for so long had been a solitary and marginalized figure, was now accepted and respected by the community. "It's amazing how things have changed," Gilson remarked, watching the children playing in the park. "Not long ago, I felt invisible." "That shows the power of truth and justice," Marlene replied. "When people know the real story, they can change their hearts." Gilson nodded, feeling a new hope blossoming within him. "Thank you, Marlene. Thank you for not giving up on me. I'll always be here for you," she said with a smile. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with warm hues of orange and pink, Gilson picked up his guitar and began to play a soft, hopeful melody. The music drifted through the park, filling the air with a sense of renewal and possibility. Justice had been served, and with it, a new life was beginning for Gilson. The community that had once ignored him now embraced him, showing that even in the darkest of times, there is always room for redemption and change. As the days turned into weeks, Gilson began to recover not only his physical health, but also his spirit. Sitting in the small but cozy living room of his new home, he talked with Marlene and Eduardo about his future. "I've always wanted to go back to being a doctor," Gilson confessed, his eyes reflecting a mixture of hope and doubt. "But I don't know if I'm ready. It's been so many years." Marlene smiled warmly at him. "Gilson, you've shown incredible resilience. If anyone can do it, you can." Eduardo nodded in agreement. "Besides, the community is behind you. Everyone here knows what you've been through and wants to see you succeed." Gilson took a sip of his tea, deep in thought. "Maybe you're right. I feel like it's time to let go of the past and focus on what I can really do to help others." With his decision made, Marlene and Eduardo helped Gilson update his resume and contact the local hospital. The response was quick and positive. The hospital director, Dr. Rojas, was impressed by Gilson's experience and knowledge. "We are delighted to have you join us, Dr. Gilson," Dr. Rojas said when they met in his office. "I know your presence here will be invaluable to our community." The first few days back at the hospital were a mixture of nerves and excitement for Gilson. It had been so long since he had been in an operating room that it felt like he was rediscovering a part of himself. "Dr. Gilson," said a young nurse named Anna, "we have a complicated case in the ER." Gilson nodded, adjusting his white coat as he followed Anna through the hospital corridors. Upon reaching the emergency room, he was met with a patient in critical condition. Without missing a beat, he immersed himself in his work, his medical skills and knowledge returning to him as if they had never left. As the weeks passed, Gilson began to feel a renewed sense of purpose. Each patient he treated, each life he saved, reminded him why he had chosen to become a doctor in the first place. His skill and dedication did not go unnoticed. Colleagues and patients alike began to speak of him with respect and admiration. One afternoon, as he was leaving the hospital, he encountered a group of neighbors who had come to see him. Doña Clara, the elderly woman who had organized the fundraiser for Gilson, was among them. "We wanted to thank you, Dr. Gilson," she said, handing him a basket filled with fruit and flowers. "You've done so much for us." Gilson, visibly moved, accepted the gift with a smile. "Thank you, Doña Clara. It's an honor to serve this community." Music, which had always been his sanctuary, continued to play an essential role in his life. Evenings in the park, with his guitar in hand, became a ritual. His music, once tinged with melancholy, now reflected a tone of hope and redemption. People would stop to listen, many recognizing him as the doctor who had saved their loved ones. Marlene and Eduardo often joined him, enjoying the moments of peace and camaraderie. One evening, as Gilson played a soft melody, Marlene leaned in and whispered in his ear, "I'm so proud of you, Gilson. You've come a long way." Gilson looked at her with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Marlene. Your support has been everything." Eduardo, sitting nearby, added, "You're an inspiration to us all." The community began organizing events in the park, where Gilson not only played his music, but also gave talks on health and well-being. Children, fascinated by his story and his music, would gather around him, listening intently. In each note he played, in each patient he treated, Gilson found a renewed passion for life. His return to work marked a new beginning, not only for him, but also for the community that had welcomed him back. Together, they showed that even in the darkest of times, compassion and solidarity could ignite a light of hope. Valdomiro spent the first few weeks in prison reflecting on his actions. The solitude of his cell and the weight of his guilt began to erode his arrogance. Each night, as he lay on his bunk, Marlene's words echoed in his mind. "Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity," she had said. The truth of her words haunted him. One day, he received an unexpected visit from his father, Don Ernesto. His father was a stern businessman, whose disapproval had always been a driving force in Valdomiro's life. But on this afternoon, Don Ernesto did not carry his usual critical gaze. Instead, he sat across from Valdomiro with an expression of deep sadness. "Valdomiro," his father began, "I've come to see you because I believe it's time you faced the consequences of your actions. I can't help you get out of here, but I can offer you something far more important, a chance to change." Valdomiro, surprised by his father's tone, looked up. "What do you mean, Dad?" "I want you to use this time to reflect and become a better man. When you get out, I want you to dedicate yourself to helping others. It's the only way you can redeem yourself." Those words resonated deeply with Valdomiro. When he was finally released, Valdomiro decided to follow his father's advice. He enrolled in several volunteer programs and began working at soup kitchens and homeless shelters. At first, many doubted his intentions, but over time, his dedication and genuine effort began to change people's perceptions. One afternoon, while serving food at a soup kitchen, he came face to face with a familiar face. It was Eduardo, Marlene's friend. Eduardo approached cautiously, unsure how to react to Valdomiro's presence. "What are you doing here?" Eduardo asked, a mixture of curiosity and suspicion in his voice. Valdomiro, wiping his hands on his apron, replied sincerely, "I'm trying to make things right. I know I can't undo the harm I've caused, but I want to atone for my mistakes." Eduardo observed him for a moment, before slowly nodding. "I hope you've truly changed, Valdomiro. Everyone deserves a second chance, but you have to earn it." The road to redemption was not easy. Valdomiro faced many skeptical looks and snide remarks, but his resolve did not waver. Every day, he woke up with a renewed purpose, determined to prove that he had changed. Over time, his work began to bear fruit. Not only was he helping people experiencing homelessness, but he was also organizing fundraising events to improve the facilities at the shelters. Little by little, his name ceased to be synonymous with arrogance and cruelty and became a symbol of change and hope. One day, while collecting donations for an event, he ran into Gilson. The last time they had seen each other, things had not ended well, but now both men looked at each other with a newfound understanding. "Gilson," Valdomiro said, extending a hand in peace, "I know my words can't erase the past, but I want you to know that I am truly sorry. I'm working to change, and I hope that one day you can forgive me." Gilson stared at Valdomiro's outstretched hand for a moment before taking it. "Valdomiro, the road to forgiveness is long, but if you're willing to walk it, I'll be here to support you." That gesture marked the beginning of a new chapter in their relationship. Valdomiro and Gilson began working together on various community projects. Their complementary skills and shared desire to make a difference created an unexpected but powerful alliance. Through these endeavors, Valdomiro discovered a new side of himself. He found fulfillment and purpose in helping others and in working alongside people he had once looked down upon. His actions began to inspire others in the community, demonstrating that change was possible. The relationship between Valdomiro and Gilson grew stronger with time. Together, they not only rebuilt the community, but also their own lives. Valdomiro learned the value of humility and empathy, while Gilson found in his newfound friend an ally in his mission to heal and to help. Valdomiro had spent the last few months dedicated to his new mission, opening a community center to support people experiencing homelessness and children in vulnerable situations. The building, a renovated old factory, was located in the heart of the neighborhood and had become a symbol of change and hope. At the grand opening of the center, Valdomiro stood at the entrance, nervous but filled with pride. Beside him were Gilson, Marlene, and Eduardo, who had been his pillars of support throughout this project. "Thank you all for being here," Valdomiro began, his voice resonating with sincerity. "This center is not just a physical space, it's a testament to our capacity for change and redemption. A while ago, I made a lot of mistakes, but with the support of these incredible people, I've learned to be better. This is just the beginning of what we can achieve together." The applause that followed was warm and heartfelt. Marlene squeezed Valdomiro's shoulder. "You've done an amazing job. I'm so proud of you." Eduardo nodded, smiling. "This just goes to show that we can all change if we're willing to put in the effort." Gilson, guitar slung over his shoulder, approached Valdomiro. "Today is a day for celebration," he said. "Why don't we kick things off with some music?" They made their way to the small stage set up in the middle of the large hall. Gilson took a seat on a stool, tuned his guitar, and began to play a soft, hopeful melody. The notes filled the air, enveloping everyone in a warm, sonic embrace. As Gilson played, the memories of difficult times began to fade, replaced by joy and hope. Children ran and played, adults chatted and laughed, and a sense of community and belonging permeated every corner of the center. After a couple of songs, Gilson paused and looked out at the audience. "This is a special song," he announced. "It's dedicated to everyone who has found the strength to change and to everyone who is searching for a new beginning." The notes flowing from Gilson's guitar were soft yet full of emotion. The lyrics spoke of forgiveness, second chances, and the capacity within each person to find their own path to redemption. As he sang, tears welled up in the eyes of many in the audience, touched by the sincerity of his message. Valdomiro, Marlene, and Eduardo joined Gilson on stage. Together, they sang the chorus, their voices intertwining in a harmony that resonated with the power of unity and hope. When the song ended, the applause was deafening. Valdomiro took the microphone and, with a voice filled with emotion, said, "Thank you, Gilson. Your music has been an inspiration to us all." Gilson smiled, setting his guitar aside. "Music has the power to heal, to unite. But what we've accomplished here today goes beyond any melody. We've shown that no matter how difficult the road, there's always hope if we're willing to walk together." The evening continued with more music, laughter, and celebration. Community members approached to offer their support and thank Valdomiro, Gilson, Marlene, and Eduardo for their dedication and hard work. The community center, once just a dream, now stood as a beacon of hope in the neighborhood. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with hues of pink and orange, Valdomiro found himself gazing at the horizon, reflecting on everything that had transpired. Marlene came up beside him and took his hand. "Today was an incredible day," she said with a smile. "Yes, it was," Valdomiro replied, "but this is only the beginning. There's still so much more we can do." "And we will," Eduardo affirmed, joining them. "Together, we can accomplish anything." Gilson, observing the scene, felt a deep sense of inner peace. "It's amazing how life can change," he said softly. "A year ago, none of us could have imagined being here today, working together towards a better future." "That's the beauty of life," Marlene replied. there's always room for hope and redemption. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Gilson picked up his guitar once more. "One last song to close out this perfect day," he suggested. The others nodded, and Gilson began to play a peaceful, comforting melody. The notes soared towards the heavens, carrying with them a message of love, hope, and possibility. Around him, the community drew closer, forming a circle of support and friendship. In that moment, beneath the starlit sky, Gilson, Valdomiro, Marlene, and Eduardo knew that no matter what challenges they might face, they would always have an inexhaustible source of strength in their friendship and in the community they had helped to build. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of transformation and hope. If you were moved by Gilson, Valdomiro, Marlene, and Eduardo's journey as much as we were, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories. Remember, we all have the power to change our lives and the lives of others with a little compassion and determination. Share this video with your friends and family so that together we can spread a message of love and redemption. And don't forget to leave us your comments below. Which part of the story resonated with you the most? We'd love to hear from you and connect. Until next time, keep believing in the magic of second chances. See you in our next video.